I'm Anthony Warner. This is Hi, how's everybody doing?
Hey, Anthony.
Room full of people you can't see on the internet. Um,
Nice.
It's my homebrew antenna experiment. Basically, we're going to start out with some basics. If you do any of these things in the video, you can't hold me liable for what the government will do to you. They will pick you up, and there are substantial fines for violating airwave regulations. Pretty much every wireless device you can buy essentially transmits a signal. Wi-Fi is no different. It's essentially functioning the same way as radio, only on a much higher wavelength. According to the government, you're allowed to have 0.1 kilowatts technically for FM broadcasting, which Wi-Fi broadcasting, I think that would cause some nausea, dizziness, disorientation. So for this one, I left it at about a watt, my maximum power.
That's his ERP. It's effective radiated power.
Mm-hmm.
Just means counting off the antenna itself.
Yes. There's the important caveat, and here's what actually might happen if you go beyond that. Nothing! That was supposed to be a picture of somebody's head exploding, but apparently it doesn't function. Presentations. But somebody's head was exploding there, not a black box.
It was just exploding in the dark.
Yes. I had to censor it for copyright reasons. Redacted. These are two of the classic routers that I would consider, or at least that one's mine. The 610N is the experimental unit that I use for this, or you can always go with the 54G. All classics, and the reason why you want these is because you can load custom firmware on them very, very easily. Anything with a Broadcom chip, you can pretty much put DDRT, Tomato, anything you want on there. And the important reason you want to do that is because you can change the transmission power on your antennas. And you can set which ones you can send and receive from manually. Cool stuff. Especially for our uses.
Does the 610 have external?
No.
No.
You had to get into the board.
There is two internals you can still do that.
Yep. Again, I have to point out that as you approach higher levels of amplification, you can essentially radiate someone with the power of a microwave. I think the watt level is about where you get standing next to a typical microwave oven. If you stand outside that, you're being radiated with that. You got to be very, very careful with this. No joke. As a satellite installer, I was always told, never put your hand in front of a dish. Never put it behind the LMB. You can actually cause skin lesions, burning. Wow, you stick your head in there, you fry yourself. But there is a lot of energy that is just concentrated on focal points, especially with the next dish, which is our homemade parabolic. But ostensibly what we're doing is trying to recreate externally a better version of that little black antenna or that little patch of just collection of, it's like a little matrix of wires very thinly inlaid that acts as a broadcasting antenna. Typically it would be right here in the back of the monitor. They're usually pasted in the upper left, upper right for broadcasting and receiving. And this is how we make our connections to the motherboard and use our new antenna. This little cable right here. I basically found it off a machine that I got last year, heftily donated to the Kilgore collection of old computers.
Oh, okay, that one, yes.
It had a wireless media card in it, which basically had a TV tuner adapter. Had this, I believe they're called, well, I forget what they're called. It's reverse polarity. Yeah, SNA. Basically, it'll take you from those little leads on a wireless broadcasting card or router, anything, to coax standard. So you can run a standard RG6 coax cable to whatever you build and use it for whatever purposes you want. Those typically would go on something like that. just the little board leads, and that's my 610 over there. So you could take transmission side, make your own dish, point it somewhere. Receive side, make your own dish, point it somewhere. The only thing you can't do is, well, the only thing I didn't do because I didn't build it for this project was a 5 gigahertz capable antenna. Typically, I went 2.4, so you can still support in, but not higher in. And here's all the essential tools that I needed to build this. Basically, a wire mesh vegetable strainer that you can get from any Walmart, some duct tape, cutting tools, very, very simple stuff. And you can probably buy one of those little antennas from there. What you're essentially doing, cutting a hole and shoving it through. It's really that simple to make a homebrew antenna. What you're trying to do there is make the shape of a parabolic dish. Maybe stick it inch to inch or half inch above where the edge of the disc would be, so you can get some overlap. And man, I'm bad at doing presentations. When you get
you can measure the signal to adjust.
Yeah.
Where you actually place that.
if
Wave ratio is going to play into that.
if you have the equipment for it too, they have what we used to use for pointing satellite dishes was a signal reader, and you can adjust where your positioning is based on the signal meter readout. Or barring that, you can just look at your wireless reception. If you can see where you're pointing at, you did a good job. Secure it with duct tape, hot glue, anything you can to keep that antenna from shifting at all during movement. It's okay to be a little wobbly, but try to make it as solid as possible. And there's where my reverse polarity SMA connector comes in. And you can convert what is typically on the back of most antennas is a reverse polarity SMA. I forget which standard it is, but there's a way to take it to standard coax so you can run it on that end as well. And you can just splice it together or buy an adapter. They're fairly cheap. I think I saw an adapter for like $5 or $6 to take from mini antenna lead to coax. And you can run it however the hell you want. You know, just mount it on something. Saw that most of the wire strain actually has those two little metal hooks on the end of it. So you can screw those down to anything and just leave it as a static point and go wherever you're going to go and point at it. That's essentially what you're going to be doing, beaming information from one place to another by concentrating the RF energy from the dish to another dish or another point of reception. Keeping in mind that it does you no good to have it just one way. If you're pointing it at your laptop and you're like, well, I can see it just fine, but for some reason I can't get an IP address, that's because you're not transmitting back. Your half-mile broadcast does you no good if it can't send anything back. So typically you're going to make these in pairs. Or barring that, you can go with another topology, which will bring you to the next device that I saw, or made. Took extensive time and measurement. It's called the Yagi antenna. Very typical design. It's what you would think of for like classic television reception. Modified for the wavelength that we need. All this has to do with is filament size, copper filament size, placement, exact location on the piece of wood as it goes down, or whatever medium you use. One of the reasons why I don't recommend actually trying to make one of these is because of this very reason. You can find them on eBay for $10.59 with free shipping. It costs about that much in parts, and by the time you get done making it, you will have probably wasted more time than you would have just ordering this and going on. But that's one of the reasons why I don't recommend using this. Even this comes with like a RPSNA connector, so it's not like it's a big deal. Straight up buy this and use it in your topology. You can set up 4 of them and sequence at a central broadcasting location and use the other method to broadcast from your remote. So you can have a pointer to wherever it is you set this up. Doing this experiment, I was able to set it at the top of the mountain in the back of the holler and have it radiate over the entire area. And wherever I went, I pointed the parabolic and I was able to stream video. I was able to look through web pages. It was important to note that the further away you get, of course, the less bandwidth you're going to have. Signal scattered in effect and whatnot. But
What was the maximum distance you could get with your signal?
I got 3/4 of a mile down the holler before I was able to not be able to do anything.
You would have had more issues with hills
Yes.
Where is this at? Like, what?
in traffic.
Basically, it was a V-shaped back into a mountain. Central holler location, sort of like the ideal broadcast area, basically. I pointed it down in the valley area of the mountain, and I was able to, as long as I had line of sight and nothing had gotten in the way like a tree or anything, you could point up at it, get wireless signal anywhere down the holler. So you could set up a link from a shared internet connection to the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill. No problem. Like I said, it comes a very big pain in the butt to try to make this homemade. So the only way you'd ever want to do it is if you wanted the experience doing it. I made one, and it took a weekend of careful measurement. Even then, I didn't have the sort of gains that I did with the one I bought off eBay. Because it's essentially a piece of wood with a bunch of copper in it. A soldered piece of coax to the end of the copper. It just essentially radiates your signal like any other antenna.
And how far were you getting with the one you bought off eBay?
I don't know. The holler kind of ended at 3/4 of a mile. Yeah. That's about where it started turning into mountains, and it became impossible to gauge how far I could broadcast. One thing to note, I once I started cranking up the signal, people did get a little nauseous. I did exceed probably my limitation on broadcasting for that area. And it was just to see how far and how strong I could get it. I'm here all week. Any questions? Like,
So, how to get Wi-Fi in your treehouse?
I get Wi-Fi anywhere. If you own a farm, this is perfect.
So essentially, you only need one Yagi antenna to be able to,
Well,
let's say,
Yagis are still directional.
Yes.
So you need a star topology almost. You'd have to have 4 set up, or however many you feel comfortable with, broadcasting to coat an area in a central location, and then wherever else you need it, point one of the parabolics up at it.
Would you be able to, those 4 antennas, tie them into the same access point?
Yeah.
So that, whichever direction you go.
Keeping in mind, this has to obey the rules of loss of power. When you connect that many in parallel, they typically have lower power broadcasting. So that's actually where something like this would come in handy. And I didn't really put it in the presentation for some reason. Probably because I don't have a picture of it.
It's like a signal splitter for a coax.
Yeah, you can use that.
But that would be
You're
going
talking
back
about,
to
you're
hooking
talking
up
about
the
using an
parallel.
amplifier?
What if you hooked them in series?
But the amplifier is the one that I was trying to look up.
Yeah.
There's this little device I used called a Motorola signal booster, which takes coax and amplifies the signal. The important thing is to note that you don't want, you really don't want to get the device that doesn't have the right amplification. You get something that only amplifies television level signals like 700 megahertz range or something like that, it won't work. You need to get something that actually does the 2.4 gigahertz amplification. And luckily this modem signal booster did.
How does that apply back to your FCC rule?
Very, very carefully it applies.
So,
You have to really measure the gauge of signal strength that you're giving out there.
but would it be the signal strength off of all 4 antennas then?
Yes. Essentially. Because you're just going to have one combined total radiated power.
Of course, by the time, even then, by the time you got anywhere close to that limit, you'd be fine.
Yeah. Like I said, close to close to the threshold, people started getting nauseous.
Yeah, you're talking about running at 100th of the limits, so.
Right. Technically, you're not supposed to approach the 0.kilowatt range. While it is an FM broadcast, I think the Wi-Fi signals would be much, much lower in power needed. Other questions?
Is that because of the frequency of the Wi-Fi?
Yes. If you'd seen the dude's head explode, you'd understand.
Oh, I saw it. And then you said it-
Yeah, we did have to redact it.
So would you start cooking from the inside out or something like that with the microwave?
It's the same way.
Well, the same
Microwave.
You start baking.
Most microwaves are 2.4.
Yep.
They seriously are, and they just run
Very
it
close to that. yeah.
several hundred watts, so that way it can cook in a hurry.
That's why they have shielding, to prevent you from being irradiated, along with the rest of them.
They provide that nice little clear window.
Yeah, so you can just stick your face right next to it and not.
So why isn't there a weaponized Wi-Fi?
There is.
There is. Actually, there is.
The government actually has a device they point at you and it radiates and makes you like completely disabled.
They showed it in cars too.
There's another one.
It feels like your subdermis is on fire when they point it at you.